Welcome to No Holding Back with me, Susan Estrich, the podcast where I bring you the biggest names from the worlds of media, politics, and law. We dive into unfiltered, unapologetic, and insightful conversations. I speak my mind and I encourage my guests to do the same. No topic is off limits as we dive into the issues that shape our world and borrow their issues. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome back a fan favorite and a favorite of mine, the brilliant and fearless legal analyst, former federal prosecutor, and host of Justice Matters, the justice warrior himself, Glenn Kirschner. Glenn joined me back in August, and we discussed what was going on in the races of August and what Donald Trump faced in the legal world and all kinds of things that aren't relevant anymore. But now everything has changed. It certainly has. With Trump now the president-elect, there's so much to discuss with Glenn. What's going on? What's going to happen to our democracy? What's going to happen to the rule of law? Glenn, it's always a privilege to have you here with us, especially as the dust begins to settle. Glenn Kirschner, welcome to No Holding Back, and thank you so much for coming on again.
Oh, thank you for having me back, Susan. I appreciate our discussions, and now more than ever, we have a lot to sort through.
Well, we sure do. Glenn, what is going on? I mean, this transition is like none you and I have ever been through before. This victory for Donald Trump has, I guess, ended all his legal problems. Tell me how you see the landscape right now.
You know, it hasn't quite ended all his legal problems, but it sure looks like we're moving in that direction. So, with special counsel Jack Smith, who Donald Trump announced that within 2 seconds of being sworn in, he would
Yeah,
fire the prosecutor who secured 2 federal indictments of him. And I think Jack Smith is taking Donald Trump at his word. So he is, quote, winding down his
right.
cases. What I hope he is gearing up to do, and I suspect he's gearing up to do, is issue a pretty detailed special counsel report about his 2 investigations into Donald Trump's 2 batches of crimes, his crimes in D.C. designed to steal the 2020 presidential election, and his classified documents crimes for which he was indicted down in Florida. And I hope Jack Smith lays bare for the American people and for history's purpose all of the evidence, because if he doesn't, it could very well be that Donald Trump will order his attorney general, whoever that may end up being, to simply destroy all of the evidence that Jack Smith amassed during his special counsel investigation. But I think, by all accounts, there is not a lot of hope that Donald Trump will be prosecuted for his many federal crimes against we the people in violation of our nation's federal laws. Now, we're not quite completely out of the game, the justice game, in New York or in Georgia. So I think New York is the one that is most timely to discuss, because the Georgia RICO prosecution is kind of stuck in appellate land and will be there for quite some time. I'm sure Donald Trump's lawyers at some point will urge that it should be dismissed, even though there's no real legal basis to dismiss it. I mean, it could be paused or stayed or put on hold while Donald Trump is president, but there really is no legal basis, no firm legal basis to dismiss state court prosecutions, in my opinion. Now, the supremacy clause might say, well, listen, you can't actively prosecute a president of the United States after he's sworn in if you are a state court prosecutor. And the answer is, well, that's fine. But that does not mean there's a lawful basis to dismiss it. You just have to pause it. You have to put it on hold, just as if you put a case on hold while interlocutory appeals go up. We saw Judge Chutkan have to put her case on hold once the presidential immunity decision was appealed up the chain. So, but let's talk most directly about New York, the prosecution, because that's all coming to a head right now. There was a filing by DA Bragg's prosecutors yesterday with the presiding judge, Judge Merchan, saying precisely that. We just want you to stay the proceedings, just freeze them until Donald Trump becomes available to be prosecuted again. So then we can move to the final stage of the criminal case in which a jury of his peers convicted him of 34 felony crimes designed to cheat in the 2016 presidential election. So just moments ago or hours ago, we got the reply from Donald Trump's defense attorneys. And let me just read the first line, because I think we have to
cry.
No, but you'll probably be infuriated because, Susan, as you well know, we have to continue to meet the force of lies, disinformation, and propaganda, even when we see them in court filings. Here is the first line. Immediate dismissal of this case. This is his 34 felony guilty verdicts.
Right.
Immediate dismissal of this case is mandated by the federal Constitution, the Presidential Transition Act of 1963, and the interests of justice. The problem, Susan, that is a lie. The Constitution does not mandate dismissal of the guilty verdicts entered against somebody who committed crimes when he was a candidate who has now been elected president. The federal Constitution does not mandate that they be dismissed. What's even more laughable, the Presidential Transition Act of 1963, that was just designed to ensure a smooth transition from one administration to another. You can read it forwards and backwards. I've been digging into it. Nowhere does it say, oh, and also, mandates by law that if the incoming president is a convicted felon pending sentencing, you have to dismiss his case. No, it doesn't say that. And the interests of justice is laughable. The interests of justice say that somebody should be held accountable whenever the time is right for crimes he commits to try to cheat in a presidential election. And here is the most disheartening piece of that. What I just read, that first sentence, was signed by Donald Trump's attorney, Todd Blanche, who may very well be the Deputy Attorney General for the United States. We are living in this upside down legal hellscape, and we better buckle up because it's going to get a whole lot bumpier before it gets smoother.
I mean, in fairness, Glenn, Donald Trump isn't worried about putting this on hold for 4 years. What are they going to do 4 years from now? Bring it back after he's served his first term, after he's 80 some years old? I mean, he won, didn't he? I mean, he outlawyered the government on this one, didn't he?
Yeah, outlawyered. He won. I mean, in substance, he's won, right? The rule of law has failed. It has not risen up to meet the moment. And it's not so much the rule of law as the people who are responsible for administering the rule of law. It has all.
Glenn? You
so
think
the rule of law,
Jack Smith, they all failed?
I think state DAs have done what they could. Alvin Bragg won guilty verdicts. Fani Willis has a RICO indictment that is still active against Donald Trump and I think 18 or 17 co-defendants down there, and it's working its way through the appellate process. I think the Department of Justice most pointedly failed to meet the urgency of the moment. I mean, the classified documents case, I think, are a perfect example. Had those cases been brought much earlier in time, those are crimes that don't enjoy any presidential immunity because he committed those crimes after he left office. So, yes, we could have worked through the Aileen Cannon problem a year or more earlier than we ultimately did by delaying bringing the prosecution against Donald Trump. That's just one example where I believe the Department of Justice did not rise up to meet the urgency of the moment, and they have allowed us now to have to suffer this criminal president for a second term.
When you say they failed, Glenn, let me just get that straight. Should Merrick Garland have acted earlier? Should he have appointed a special counsel earlier? I mean, how the hell did this strategy of delay, which was clearly the strategy of the Trump defense, manage to succeed?
I don't know. He should have absolutely begun a criminal investigation of Donald Trump. Frankly, I think a criminal investigation should have been begun on January 20th at 12:01 p.m. 2021. Once he left office, we saw him incite an insurrection. We saw him direct his supporters to the Capitol to fight like hell or they won't have a country anymore. And he told them to go stop the certification. He helpfully used the word steal, which guess what? That is evidence of his criminal intent because all of his officials had told us it wasn't the product of a stolen or a rigged election. So what did the Department of Justice and Merrick Garland do? They waited for another branch of Congress, the January 6th House Select Committee, to conduct an investigation and reveal the results to the American people in public hearings. And only then did they begin in earnest going after the folks who committed crimes to try to undermine the expressed will of the American voters. That is inexplicable to me, but even more so, I understand the DOJ, my beloved home for a quarter of a century, has a policy that says we don't think it's a good idea to prosecute a sitting criminal president. That's not law. It's not. There's no precedent. There's no statute. There's no constitutional provision that says you can't prosecute a sitting president. DOJ thinks it makes good sense. It's a good policy. But why did we not act on the crimes that were meticulously documented during Trump's presidency by Bob Mueller in Volume 2 of the Trump-Russia report? Multiple felony counts of obstruction of justice. Susan, I would have walked in with Volume 2 of the Mueller report to the federal judge in chambers in D.C. who was on warrant duty for the day, and I would have stapled to the front of Volume 2 an application for an arrest warrant. Now, this is a little bit of hyperbole. There's more that goes into it procedurally than that. And I would have presented it to the judge, and I would have said, Judge, I will accept your determination on whether there's probable cause, Volume 2 of the Mueller report, to issue an arrest warrant for Donald Trump for multiple counts of obstructing justice. And 10 judges out of 10 would have issued that warrant. Now, that's not precisely the way we do it procedurally, but in substance, that's exactly what should have been done. But because we didn't do it, because we gave him a pass on obstructing justice almost 10 times over, according to the conclusions of the report or the evidence revealed in the report, we've normalized it and we've encouraged all presidents in the future, should they be inclined to commit crimes, to do it again because nobody's going to touch them. And now what is layered on top of this, we know, is the presidential immunity ruling from the Supreme Court. Listen, the rule of law is hanging by a thread right now. And I don't know if we're going to be able to knit it back together or not.
Well, hanging by a thread is a nice way of describing the appointment of Matt Gaetz. I mean, you must have been just as shocked as me, Glenn. I mean, how did you take that?
Yeah, I took it as a cruel joke on the American people, on the people of the Department of Justice, and on the notion that justice matters. Because if you put Matt Gaetz in charge of our nation's premier law enforcement agency, justice will be nowhere to be found. I mean, think about this. You know, he was investigated by the Department of Justice for potential, sex trafficking of a minor. Now, I hasten to add, Merrick Garland decided never to indict him. I don't know why. I don't know what the evidence was that caused the Department of Justice to conclude he shouldn't be indicted. But what are we now learning?
Glenn, what do you hear about that? You must hear something. I mean, what do you hear about that investigation?
Well, first of all, let's back into that answer, because what we're hearing now is there is sworn testimony from multiple witnesses saying Matt Gaetz was observed by a witness engaging in sex with a minor. And I believe one of the minors involved also said, yes, I had sex with Matt Gaetz when I was 17. So you have the victim, you have an eyewitness to the crime, you have text messages, you have money being exchanged. I mean, and you have Joel Greenberg, who was a signed up cooperating witness for the prosecutors, who was prepared to testify about the crimes of Matt Gaetz. You tell me, what am I missing as a former 30-year prosecutor?
I was going to ask you, Glenn, because I read the same stuff as you read. And I said, what am I missing as a professor of criminal law? I don't get it. You tell
so
me
now let's back into
that department. What
let's
went on?
back into the answer now. So here is, and we all hear bits and pieces behind the scenes from our sources. Now, I not from people who are actively with the Department of Justice. I respect them too much to ever want to try to talk to them about what's going on inside the Department of Justice. But a lot of reporters that I know and communicate with regularly are getting information coming out of the Department of Justice. That's their mission, their goal, and their job. So here is how I have tried to explain to people what goes into a charging decision, which is these are decisions I had to make for decades, right? Evaluating evidence to see not only whether you have probable cause, because that's simply, as you well know, the standard to arrest and indict somebody. You need a reasonable likelihood of success on the merits, which means proof beyond a reasonable doubt if you are to proceed to trial. That's DOJ's policy.
I know, but Glenn, they had two witnesses. They had sworn testimony. If that's
So
not enough, what is?
Here's what I was hearing during the investigation. I was hearing, one, the victim, and I didn't know about the witness to the crime, but the victim was not interested in participating in the investigation or any eventual prosecution. And what I know from my time as a prosecutor is if victims don't want to tell the truth about what happened, particularly if they may not even view themselves as necessarily being victimized, it can be very, very difficult to sponsor their testimony. Not impossible. You can try to compel the truth out of them in the grand jury in any number of ways, preserve it, and then when they spin you on the stand and start telling lies in front of the jury, you impeach them and you introduce their grand jury transcript as substantive evidence to prove the case. So procedurally, that's available, but it doesn't always make for the most compelling presentation of testimony to a jury, coupled with if you had a really reluctant victim / witness, coupled with what I had been hearing about Joel Greenberg. So
What have you been hearing, Glenn?
Well, we are very careful when we bring cooperators on board. We need to have them tell us the complete truth, including the truth about their own crimes, first and foremost, if a jury is ever to believe them about the crimes of others. And then they need to stick with the program. The program is telling the truth, warts and all. Some cooperators, Susan, that I brought on board fell off the cooperation train because they kept lying and deceiving and misdirecting. We would expose lie after lie after they told us, I've told you the entire truth. And what they do, even if they're signed up cooperators, they ultimately render themselves unusable at trial because prosecutors don't want the cooperator stink, as we call it, to blow back on us if we are urging a jury to credit somebody who frankly is not worthy of being credited, even if they are a signed up cooperator. So I call Joel Greenberg a 10-foot pole witness, right? You don't want to touch him except with the end of a 10-foot pole. So you have a bad cooperator, you have a reluctant victim, and I don't know about all the corroborating evidence. We're hearing about some of it now, which causes me to rethink whether it was the right prosecutorial decision to decline to prosecute Matt Gaetz. I hope to hell it wasn't a product of politics. I hope to hell. But, that is one way I can explain, based on my experience, how cases can fall apart with a bad cooperator and a reluctant victim / witness. But I can't swear that that's what was going on behind the scenes.
It's as good an explanation as any. But wouldn't it be good enough for a president, for any other president, to say, wait a minute, the fact that this guy narrowly escaped prosecution because of problems with the record and problems with a cooperating witness is enough to disqualify them from serving as the Attorney General and head of the Department of Justice? I mean, how did Trump manage to ignore it all?
Oh, he doesn't care. His goal is to burn down the institutions of government and so undermine the public's confidence in the institutions of government that he can just rule over the ashes. I mean, I think that is ultimately his goal. He doesn't care that whether Matt Gaetz is a criminal or not. He doesn't care if he is completely unqualified to serve as Attorney General. All the better in Trump's mind. I mean, look at who else he's picking, pro wrestler folks.
Wrestler, dismantled Department of Education. Who better?
I mean, all craziness, right? And he did a lot of this in his first administration too. Put people who were entirely ill-equipped and unqualified to serve in the cabinet positions that he tapped them for. This is kind of his MO. But, when you think about a Matt Gaetz, what might be the first thing Matt Gaetz orders his prosecutors to do if he becomes attorney general? Bring me my criminal investigation so I can see the witnesses who provided incriminating information against me, and then I will send the Department of Justice after them. I mean, you can see Matt Gaetz doing that in a minute.
Him doing anything Trump wants him to do. He'll investigate Nancy Pelosi. He'll investigate Joe Biden. I don't know what the hell he's going to do to the career prosecutors in there. I mean, this is a guy with talk about his experience, Glenn, because when I looked up, he had practiced law for 20 minutes. I mean, he's not a former prosecutor. He's not a former judge. He's not got any of the qualifications. He's never run anything bigger than a House office. I mean, what gives this guy the qualifications to be the top law enforcement officer in this country?
Nothing. But Donald Trump doesn't care about that. We care about that. Folks who, give one whit about the rule of law and the very notion of justice care about it. But Donald Trump doesn't care about those things. He wants lapdogs and flunkies and sycophants and lackeys in all of these positions so he can manipulate them and push them around into doing things that we know are damaging to the democracy and the American people. That is Trump's goal. But, I think there are 2 points of light. Part of what I've been trying to do, Susan, ever since the election, when not everybody, lots of people have been yelling at me in all caps across all platforms I'm on. Glenn, justice doesn't matter. What the hell are you talking about? Justice doesn't matter. My first response is always, if justice didn't matter, you wouldn't be so furious at the injustice you are seeing and we are all experiencing. So you know what? It will always matter to me, and I sense that it matters to you too, or you wouldn't be so upset by the absence of justice. So what I've been trying to do is bring points of light to our discussions without seeming Pollyanna about any of it. And I see a couple of points of light in the Matt Gaetz fiasco. One, and I never thought I would say this, I see some of the Republican senators as points of light. Why? Because it looks like they may be willing to push back on Donald Trump, on Matt Gaetz, and perhaps even other unqualified cabinet picks. And I say that for 2 reasons. One, the first decision the Republicans had to make, the Republican senators, was do we elect Rick Scott as the Senate Majority Leader because that's who Donald Trump wants? And they said, hell no. And of the 3 candidates for Majority Leader, Rick Scott was dead last. He got the fewest votes. Now, that is no profile in courage because we all know it was a secret vote. So their necks aren't on the line. Trump doesn't necessarily knows who went against dear leader in the Senate majority vote. However, we are now seeing Senate Republicans standing up and saying, well, first of all, at a minimum, we need a full confirmation hearing. We're not going to do recess appointments for petty criminals like Matt Gaetz. And second, Republican senators, some of them are even speaking out and saying that he's not qualified. He's just not qualified, and we're not going to have it. And behind the scenes, again, no profile in courage here, there are as many as 30. That's a whole lot of Republican senators who behind the scenes are saying, we're not voting for Matt Gaetz. Rarely can I find light in anything these cowardly Republican senators do or say, but I'm going to hold fast to that one point of light. They may be willing to buck dear leader if it means if they don't buck him, they'll be complicit in burning it all down. And then the second point of light is Donald Trump named 3 former DOJ prosecutors as to 3 of the highest posts at the Department of Justice. Todd Blanche, yes, I just talked about how he should not have authored this nonsensical letter.
Right.
Todd Blanche, yes, one of his criminal defense attorneys. He was at the Department of Justice, I think, for 9 years at the Southern District of New York U.S. Attorney's Office. Emile Beauvais was also 8 or 9 years a federal prosecutor. And John Sauer, who he said, he's going to have to be Solicitor General, has some time as a federal prosecutor. So what I hope these people understand is that they have been the people's servant before when they were federal prosecutors. They will be the people's servant again as high DOJ officials. They will not continue to be Donald Trump's lawyers. I think Donald Trump believes that
That
he's
they'll be
got
his
them in his
more.
pocket and they will keep doing his bidding, just like they did when they were his criminal defense attorneys. I hope these men have it in them to say, no, I will now again be a public servant. And I understand what that means because I was a federal prosecutor previously. That, to me, is another potential point of light.
You sound like an optimist. I'm a pessimist. I have this theory that when he nominated Matt Gaetz, he knew damn well that there would be substantial opposition, that this was such an outrageous nomination that it would cause opposition. But he had this theory, and I believe the theory probably will work, which is that if he nominates them and pushes them, and he forces the Republican Senate to say no to him, and they do, that whoever comes next will be just as bad as Matt Gaetz, but they'll let him through because they'll only
Maybe.
say so many times. And the more outrageous appointments he makes, the more he's likely to get through because they only have the will, these Republican senators, to say no in extraordinary circumstances. And I'm
Yeah.
worried, quite frankly, Glenn, maybe you are too, about who's going to come next if we don't get Matt Gaetz. The problem is that there are others who are just like him, maybe not quite as bad, but who have no more loyalty to the American people than Donald Trump does.
Yeah, I'm with you. I thought of that exact same scenario where he throws Matt Gaetz up. I also think the Matt Gaetz thing was to try to help give Matt Gaetz cover to keep the ethics report from
Right.
being disclosed, right?
Exactly.
Because, oh, I
Exactly.
have to resign
I
now
have to
because I
resign
was
today.
named.
Nobody else has
Well,
to resign
Mark
today.
Rubio didn't resign. Elise
Right.
Stefanik didn't resign. Come on, sport. We see right through your nonsense, right? But I agree with you. Who's going to come next in the
Who's
event
going to
Matt
come
Gaetz,
next,
his name
Glenn?
gets
I
pulled?
mean,
Well, we know it's not going to be Matthew Whitaker, who was one of Trump's other attorneys general for a cup of coffee. Remember, he was between Jeff Sessions and Bill Barr. Matt Whitaker, who was being investigated by the FBI himself, he was just named as what, ambassador to NATO or the some other post. So it won't be him. Who
he'll
will
get
it be?
confirmed, of course.
Yeah, can it be somebody worse than Matt Gaetz? I guess in theory it could be. But
Or
whoever it
almost as
is,
bad. Somebody with no experience, somebody with no commitment to the Department of Justice, somebody who's going to, do the retribution that Donald Trump has said he wants.
but Matt Gaetz, I think, would have been all in for the lawless retribution for the weaponization of the Department of Justice. So we'll have to see, if his name gets pulled or if he doesn't get confirmed, who comes next. Hard to envision it will be as bad as Matt Gaetz, but it could very well be.
Or close. I mean, I
Yeah.
just think he's putting these names out there, knowing that he's putting Republicans in impossible positions and knowing that they're only going to say no to him so many times. And that, most of them are going to be afraid to say no consecutively. I mean, you got the qualification for being on this in this cabinet seems to be on television on Fox News. And you're
Yeah.
going to have lots of people who are good on TV. What does that have to do with running the Department of Justice or the Department of
Nothing.
Education? What about the
And I,
Department of Defense, Glenn?
yeah, well, I'll get there in a sec. I see the Gates nomination as Trump dipping his toe in the dictatorial waters. He wanted to see, can I get the Senate Republicans to go along with somebody who is, the least qualified nominee for AG in the history of the country, or can I force them to go out of session so I can then make a recess appointment?
Right.
I hope the Senate says, no, we are not going to neuter ourselves. We're not going to check our spines at the door, even though they did so to get elected. Now that they're in office, they're not facing an election in the next few years. Hopefully, they will say, we're not going to give it all away. We're not going to waive our opportunity to have a confirmation hearing and provide advice and consent by going into recess. So, but I think it is Trump dipping his toe in the dictatorial water to see how far he could push the Senate Republicans, and it looks like some are going to be willing to push back. But I mean, the Secretary of Defense, Hegseth, I think he was a captain in the military. I was a captain in the military. I served 6.5 years active duty, and I ain't qualified to be Sec Def. I'll tell you that. Nor is he. He's a Fox TV host. There are lots. I'm not going to go on record as saying what I've heard said about him, as evidenced by these tattoos. I have heard some of his
What is with those tattoos,
comments.
Glenn? Glenn,
I don't
what's
know. I'm
your
not an
assessment?
expert on it, and I'm not going to wade into water where I don't know enough about it. I will leave it to the experts to talk about that. I have heard him demeaning women in the military, and it almost sounded to me he was saying, look, sweetheart, you can have a desk job, but you're not going to be playing with the big boys with the uniforms and the guns, which is pretty despicable. That's my spin on the kind of garbage he was saying.
Where did you
Um,
hear him say that? I
I heard
haven't
him.
heard that.
Women shouldn't serve in combat. Listen, I hate to say so much of this combat is now computerized and courtesy of
Right.
drones, and even if it wasn't, I served in the military next to men and women. Don't tell me women can't serve and do everything men can do. Don't tell me that because I don't buy it. But that is his opinion, right? So I don't know. Does his name get pulled? Does he not get confirmed? I have no idea. But listen, Trump is nominating clown after clown after clown, trying to fill up the clown car, and we'll have to see what the Senate Republicans do with it all.
Who are the Senate Republicans that you trust, Glenn?
Who are the Senate Republicans that I trust? Trust is a strong word.
It's a strong word, trust, but it's a
Yeah.
valuable word.
Verify first and then trust. I don't know. Listen, I am glad Thune is going to be the Senate Majority Leader, at least as compared to Rick Scott. Guys like Lindsey Graham have completely disqualified themselves from, the only thing he contributes to any conversation is carbon dioxide. I mean, he has disqualified himself 100 times over. So I can't say that I have a lot of trust in the Senate Republicans. What I do have trust in is that they care about their own prestige and their own station in life, which I think is what kept them quiet and cowardly so they could get elected, so they didn't alienate Trump's base. But now I think they're like, listen, I'm now a sworn in senator. I don't have to stand for reelection for a long time. I'm not going to give all my power over to Donald Trump or the executive branch and neuter myself, because then I'm just going to sit here for 6 years and accomplish nothing and not be taken seriously. That's why I hope that they're going to take their status as a co-equal branch of government seriously and protect their own damn constituents from Donald Trump's dangerous cabinet picks, right? It's kind of their job. At the bottom of it all, they need to protect their own constituents from Donald Trump's dangerous cabinet picks. So I don't know. I have high hopes, and I suspect they will be dashed by the Senate Republicans.
I suspect they'll be dashed too. What do you say to people who ask you, Glenn, what can I do now? This is what I get from people now. The people on the Democratic side feel totally powerless, is my
Yeah.
sense. And they have no
For,
strategy right now. I still get fundraising emails from Kamala Harris. If I get one more fundraising email from Kamala Harris, I swear to God, I don't know what I'm going to do. This is not the position we should be taking right now, that we need to give more money. Obviously, money didn't do it. But what can Democrats do and what can Republicans do? And do you think there's going to be any kind of popular uprising so early in this administration when it seems like there were a lot of people who wanted Donald Trump to come in and clear that damn swamp?
yeah. So I'm a rule of law guy. So I may be the wrong one to ask what can we do sort of politically to have an impact and to try to make things better. There are a couple of things that come to mind. One is something that this is like going to be something people have heard 1,000 times. I still do it because it's valuable to me. I call and text and email my elected officials all the time. I am sitting right across the parking lot from a satellite office for my member of Congress. I walk over there and I chew on them all the time. And I say, these are my priorities. I believe they're our priorities. They're American priorities. Please push these issues. Now, if you're in a red state, people will say, well, I don't have anybody who's willing to listen to me. Do it anyway. Do it anyway, because they will catalog your calls. They will, make a note of the things that the constituents are saying. So please contact all of your elected officials early and often, from your city councilman and your school board and your mayor up through your governor and your state elected officials, and your officials in Washington do that, because it will also, I think, make you feel like you're doing something, and you are, because they will catalog it, keep a record of it, and ultimately it's better to do it than to not do it. Something else we can do is we are now shifting from hoping that our elected leaders and our prosecutors would get to the right result for the American people and for democracy. Now we're going to shift focus, and there are going to be hundreds and thousands of lawsuits brought by really important civic organizations, civil rights organizations, that will defeat lots of the lawlessness Trump attempts to inject into, for example, executive orders, right? Remember the hateful Muslim ban that Donald Trump signed 7 days into his first administration? He signed it, it got struck down by the courts. He signed a modified version, it got struck down by the courts. He signed a third version, it got struck down by the courts. And the fourth time, he was forced to water it down, but it did withstand legal attack. We are going to have, I don't want to name the organizations, but there are lots of great organizations out there that, because I don't want to leave any out or highlight any, that are doing the civil rights work of the people and will file lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit, many of which will be successful. I heard one of the governors, another point of light, we have state governors and attorneys general who are banding together saying, you're not going to mess with the civil rights of the people in my state. We're not going to have it. We're going to bring suit against the Trump administration. You know, previously, I think there was an 80% success rate in these suits that were brought by state attorneys general during the first Trump administration. I heard one of the attorney generals say that. And so we have to support those folks as best we can, both the governors and the attorneys general who are bringing these suits, and all of the civil rights organizations that are going to try to keep Donald Trump's lawlessness in check. And I predict they will do it with great success. Volunteer to help those organizations, or obviously you can donate money to those organizations. I am, because they're going to be doing the hard work of the American people, kind of like Mark Elias in the Democracy Project, the Democracy Docket. He was filing lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit, trying to make sure that the Republicans could not, trample over people's voting rights. And he had remarkable success. And I think his organization, like the ACLU and so many others, are going to be standing as a bulwark against Trump's lawlessness. And that's something else we can all get involved in.
But what about the fact, Glenn, that, Trump already had 4 years to influence the courts. He did influence the courts. We've got a Supreme Court majority right now that it was part of what I consider a sort of conspiracy of delay and silence and protecting Donald Trump, and gave him immunity from prosecution. What about the courts? Donald Trump is going to try to fill the courts with his appointees. He's going to have the same success he's had in the past. And we're going to get a new generation of federal judges who are going to be limiting our rights in the foreseeable future.
Yeah, and I actually see the federal trial bench as a point of light, and here's why. Yes, Donald Trump appointed lots of unqualified judges, more technically not qualified, which is the ABA rating of some of the judges that Donald Trump pushed through. He didn't care, right? But think about this. In 2020 and 2021, all 60 plus suits that Rudy Giuliani, Sidney Powell, and his other dirty lawyers brought were rejected. Every single one, but one minor exception, were rejected, many by Trump-appointed lawyers. I hold fast to that piece. Judge Carl Nichols in my backyard, the federal district court in Washington, D.C., where I know most of the judges because I practiced there for decades. A lot of my former homicide prosecutors from the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office now populate both the trial court bench and the Federal Circuit Court of Appeals in D.C. And these people are going to act as a bulwark against Trump's illegality, both in the civil suit arena and in the vindictive prosecution arena. They are going to remain loyal to the law and the Constitution, and they will serve as a bulwark. Here's the other thing. Think about the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals panel, the 3-judge panel that twice ruled that Judge Aileen Cannon abused her judicial discretion by doing something to the benefit of Donald Trump that the law did not allow. All three judges were appointed by Republican presidents. Two were appointed by Trump. We can't lump all Trump federal judges into the same basket because many of them have stood up. Just yesterday, Judge Carl Nichols, I sat through, trials watching him preside, and he presided pretty effectively, I thought. Trump appointee yesterday said it would be, he didn't use the word travesty. He said it would be a shame. It would be wrong. I forget the precise word he used. If the J6 defendants were pardoned for their criminal conduct and their convictions. That was a Trump appointee. So
right.
It's a point of light.
Trump, Glenn?
I'm sorry?
Is that going to stop Trump from pardoning these people?
No. And, my friends who defended the Capitol that day, Mike Fanone, who was one of the officers who was damn near killed and has become sort of the face of the attack together with Harry Dunn. Mike Fanone and I worked murder cases decades ago in the streets of Washington, D.C. He was the cop. I was a prosecutor. So I take all of this very personally because Donald Trump makes clear he doesn't back the blue. He backs those who beat the blue. That's what he did. He's pledged love and pardons to the people who beat the blue on January 6th. I'm not convinced he's going to just issue wholesale pardons of all J6 defendants. He might, but boy, what a horrific disservice to the victims, to everybody at the Capitol that day, to our democracy, to the grand juries and trial juries and staff and judges that presided over cases where juries said, no, these men and women are guilty of these crimes that were part and parcel of attacking our democratic process. If Donald Trump gives them aid and comfort by pardoning them, there's got to be hell to pay somehow. I don't know precisely how. I don't know precisely how. Susan, if you and I had all the answers, then we would probably be able to fix the problems. All we can do is
I worry that there are no answers, that if you and I don't know what the answer is, it's not because we're not thinking hard enough. And it's not because we don't have enough experience. It's because the president has tremendous power, and this guy's going to use it.
And let's face it, other countries have fallen. Other democracies have become dictatorships and autocracies. And I have always said, America, it's not impossible here. It just takes the right set of circumstances and enough cowards in power in positions of power that won't stand up to an aspiring dictator. And that's kind of where we're finding ourselves.
Do you think there is, I know I've used your time, you're just such a wonderful guest, Glenn, that I just love listening to you. And so do the people who listen to Justice Matters. And I think justice still matters. And when my kids say to me, is democracy going to survive? I have to say, I believe that it will. But do you?
I believe that it will. Listen, here's another point of light, Susan. Maybe this is a good ending point. I take some comfort in this point of light, and I acknowledge the darkness. These points of light are maybe piercing through the darkness here and there, but the darkness is coming, right? And it's consequential, and we know that. In Donald Trump's first 2 years of his first term, when he had the White House, the House of Representatives, and the Senate, he accomplished almost nothing. Build a wall in Mexico, we'll pay for it? Nope. We're going to do infrastructure week. Nope. I'm going to repeal and replace Obamacare, the ACA. Nope. Accomplished, really? Tax cuts for billionaires, and he'll probably accomplish that again at the expense of regular folk. But I take some comfort in that dysfunction, and I hope we see 2 years of dysfunction, and it so demoralizes even the people who voted for them. Let him take away the health care of his base, and let's see if he really repeals the ACA this time. But I think people will see in 2 years they're going to be worse off than they are today under the Biden administration. Maybe that gives the Dems an opportunity to learn from their mistakes, message in a different way, like talking to everybody. Go on Joe Rogan, go on every damn podcast in the country to reach every possible audience, because legacy media is no longer the way to win elections and get your message to the people.
Let me ask you one final question, because it sounds like you and I are on exactly the same page. What did the Kamala Harris campaign do wrong?
They first of all, they didn't have much time, and I think it takes a long time to get your message to saturate the American
Yeah.
psyche. I thought she came a long way as a campaigner from when she was running against Joe Biden, where I didn't
Yeah.
think she was particularly adept at campaigning. And I think I think you have to make yourself available early and often to those platforms that really will get the message out, not just to the Dems. If you just preach to the converted, you're not expanding anything. I probably listen. I am not a political pundit, and I feel guilty even saying I would have probably said, listen, I don't need to be on cable news and all of the left leaning podcasts. I'm going to spend all of my time bringing a legitimately populist message, um, bring, bringing a legitimately kind of populist message to all of the folks who otherwise aren't ever going to have a chance to see or hear me because they're not watching cable news and they're not listening to NPR and they're not reading the New York Times. And it
Right.
feels like that's where a lot of the campaign's time and energy and efforts were directed. But again, I'm not a political operative, so what the heck do I know?
Well, if you ask me, Glenn Kirschner knows a lot about a lot. And so I just want to thank you for taking the time. And I hope we'll come back again after Matt Gaetz is voted down and we'll say, okay, there's one. What's our next target? But I hope you're right about the points of light, because I see a lot of dark, and
Yeah,
it's
but we'll
better to have it on.
we'll keep fighting for it, Susan.
Keep
With
fighting.
everything we've got, right? Thank you for inviting me back, and I look forward to joining you again.
I hope you will. You've been listening to No Holding Back with me, Susan Estrich. I want to take this moment to thank Glenn Kirschner today for such a candid, thought-provoking, and a little bit encouraging show. Make sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can listen to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also watch every episode on our YouTube channel. Please leave us a rating and review on your chosen platform. It really helps us reach more listeners and keep the conversation going. You can also listen to Glenn Kirschner on a regular basis on his incredibly popular podcast, Justice Matters. Follow us on X at No Holding Back FM. And for my weekly column, visit our website, estrichgolden.com. You hear my dog right now. She's on board. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next time on No Holding Back.